The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And I am back.
Lovely. All right. Hi, everybody. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes for people to finish signing in, and then we'll get started. All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we expect a few more people to sign in, so hopefully that will happen once we get underway. I want to start by just saying hi and Happy New Year to everybody. Oh, but look, I have not adjusted the slide. It is now 2018, even though the slide says otherwise. And today's topic is going to be sort of a tour through Tableau and Voyant. And we're going to have Teresa Burris presenting that from the St. Pete Science Festival. So I'm going to turn things over to Teresa in just a couple of minutes. Before I do that, I wanted to give you sort of a roadmap of how we're going to spend the time today. Almost all of the time in today's webinar is going to be for Teresa to give us the tour. And the purpose of that is it's really an extension of last year's annual meeting and feedback that you all provided about wanting some new ideas about how to do data visualization, about how to analyze and explore your data that did not rely on Excel. And Teresa was nice enough to say, hey, I actually, I know a little bit about this. And if you'd be interested in having me give a tour of a couple of other options, then I'd be happy to do that. And we were thrilled to have that option. And so my first shout out indeed goes to Teresa for standing up and doing that and being willing to teach us all today a little bit about some of the tools and tricks that she likes in both Tableau and Voyant. If anybody else out there has a skill that they think they could share and that the community would benefit from, and you'd be interested in doing one of these yourself, then please let us know. We're happy to have the community help to host these. If you think that you've got a skill that the community is itching to learn more about. The other shout out that I wanted to give today actually goes to Todd, and I'm not sure that I see if he has signed on yet or not. So I have a little bit of an update related to this shout out. It's not a full update yet, but I know that several of you were alarmed, and rightly so, about the heads up email that we sent out last month about the consent form process. Todd has been going to great efforts to communicate with the IRB and to see if we can land on a process that is not quite as cumbersome as the one that we had originally laid out. And so he is, we still don't have final approval yet, but he's in the process of negotiating a fact sheet instead of a written consent form that we can show to people. And the lovely thing about that is that we will use the fact sheet. People will take as little or as much time as they want to read it, and then all the rest of the survey will happen as it always has in the past. And so it really streamlines the process, but still meets the IRB requirements. We're hoping to have final approval on that within the week. So stay tuned for updates on that. But a huge thank you to Todd for all of the time and energy that has gone into getting us as far as we've been able to get so far with that process. All right. That is all that I'm going to say up front, I will have some more updates to share at the end of the meeting, so stay tuned for those. For now, I'm going to turn things over to Teresa. And so, Teresa, I just unmuted your mic, and let me make you the presenter. Okay, and I think if you share your screen, then we'll be ready to roll.
Okay, so are you seeing my screen?
We are. If there's a way for you to show it full screen, that might be helpful. It's showing up on only part of the screen on my side.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I have it in present mode. Are you seeing something else also?
Oh, maybe that's why. No, we don't see your present mode, but it looks like if I look at the Zoom on the top, it says I'm at 41%, but that may be so that you can see in present mode on your side.
Okay.
That's okay though. We can still read it. Why don't we just go ahead?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Like Karen said, I'm Teresa. I met some of you last summer at IPSEC and EvalFest, and we in St. Pete are very excited to host the 2018 Science Events Summit this coming June, and possibly an EvalFest meeting. And so my packing tips for you all are bring sunblock and your bathing suit, but don't forget an umbrella, because June, while it is hot and often sunny, it also can be rainy. So those are my most important tips today. Like Karen said, she invited me to join the group to introduce a couple of free web-based tools that could help us analyze the data that has been collected for EvalFest. And the two tools, so the two tools that we're going to discuss are Tableau, which handles quantitative data, and Voyant, which handles textual data. And why these tools, and specifically, are that both of them have a free version available to the public. Both are touted as very easy to use, and they don't require any programming knowledge. And thirdly, they both have specific features, different features that can take data visualization beyond what Excel can do easily. Karen shared with me some example data from EvalFest, and I'm showing you on the screen just a snippet from the spreadsheet. And this data is select festivals, and it is festival ratings, basically. It is the group of festivals that also participated in the Secret Shopper mini grant, I believe. And Karen, please correct me if I'm wrong. So the talk in general, this talk, it's not meant to be a training. Like I said, we're just gonna give a very, very basic overview of each tool. And the reason why Karen thought this might be useful to have me lead it as opposed to you all just watching videos on your own is that the example data that we're using is specifically applicable to the group. So let's jump in and take a look at Tableau. It's menu-driven software, and the purpose of it, it's meant to be able to crank out nice data visualizations from using multiple data sets, using big data sets, using data sets outside that are not local. So global type, large scale data sets. It's a commercial product, it's a for-profit company, it's available by a variety of different licenses. There's 3 ways to use it. There is a Tableau public version. All 3 versions, you will have to install a desktop application, and the desktop application looks basically the same under all 3 different kinds of licenses. The difference is if you use Tableau Public, you're basically committing to creating a Tableau Public profile, and that is where you would save your completed data visualizations. It doesn't really want you to save them locally, privately. However, that being said, so basically you are donating your data viz to a corporate entity. I'm not super keen about that, but it's really meant for people who are bloggers who are just pulling quick data sets from elsewhere and then being able to crank out a data visualization and then immediately publish it to the web. For us, for our group, you know, it's not really dealing with confidential research data. I mean, that's not what the purpose of this is. However, I was successful getting a Tableau for Teaching license that allows me to store my data visualizations locally, and it's also free. And so I have this by virtue, I believe, of my .edu email because I'm at an academic institution. It's fairly broadly available. And again, they're very corporate. They're just looking for future customers. So that's why they're reaching out to the academic community in this way. The commercial Tableau products, I have no experience with those at all. The screen. This is what you see when you first open Tableau. The first step is to connect to data. So this is the only thing that differs slightly. So when I looked at Tableau Public versus my desktop Tableau, which is what this is a screenshot of, the Tableau Public doesn't have that server option to access different kinds of data sources. I'm bringing in data from this 2012 Expo and Mystery data set. And it first adds it on the top left where the green arrow is. You then drag it and drop it into that middle space. And if you do that successfully, the data table appears below. So you can see basically the same data that I showed you in the spreadsheet version. This, it's the same exact data, it's just coded as opposed to textual. So it's duplicate data. At this point, if you have questions, if you're taking a data set that you're not sure about or comfortable with, it gives you the option to use this data interpreter, which actually is kind of slick. It brings up a nice spreadsheet and says, oh, I think these are your data points. It highlights those in green. I think these are your headers. It highlights those. And these data points are suspect, and it puts a big red box around it. It does not have a problem with cells that have null in them, so that wasn't an issue. And Karen's data set that she provided was super clean, so it gave me basically a thumbs up. So at this point, this is the strength of Tableau, that you can actually add a second data set and it will attempt to join it together. And the only requirement to join multiple data sets is basically to have a column in common. And so I identified up here, you'll see the second data set has a yellow highlight on it, and I actually had to choose the kind of join I wanted, which columns were in common. And what I attempted to do here was do a full outer join and then match the Expo name column to the Expo name column in the second table. So hopefully that makes sense, but you'll see below that in addition to the numerical ratings that have a blue highlighter at the top of each, highlighted at the top of each column, then there's a second list of tables. So it basically doubled the number of columns. And I used this just to illustrate the join feature. And at this point, once you have the data sets that you want, in the data source screen, which is what we've been looking at, then you move to a worksheet. And this is the Tableau interface in which you create your data visualizations. Now, the interesting thing about Tableau, and it took me a little bit to make sense of this, is that Tableau organizes all of the groups of data in two ways. They call it a dimension, which includes categorical, discrete data columns. Basically. The second kind of item is a measure. And a measure is meant to be a continuous data point. So in corporate world, that would be dollars, like profit, sales, those kinds of figures. It might be years in some cases if you're doing historical over time. And we'll come back to this later, but you'll notice that I deleted the things that I was not going to use. So we have expo name, that's a category, there's 7 or 8 of them. The rationale, which is text data, Tableau doesn't really know how to handle that. And then in the measures group, there's the rating number, which when I initially pulled it in, it tried to add all of those numbers up and get a total. So I actually had to make a change and ask it, change the measure type to average rather than sum. And that's how I got this nice average rating. And the other 2 fields down there in measures are fields that Tableau calculates automatically, which is pretty slick. So the number of records, and when I sort of inquired on the help screen about that, it actually states that number of records can be a handy measure in the case where most of your data is categorical rather than continuous. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So those are the data points initially brought in. What you do on the screen, and I'm putting my mouse over expo name on the left, is you basically click, drag it and drop up to the top into the columns box. And then you do the same thing with the rating measure. And that's how this table happened. Then if you want to do additional formatting, that all happens in that marks box. So changing the kind of chart, changing the colors, sizes, labels, adding details, annotations, and that kind of thing, that all happens in that marks box. The last area of the desktop that I just want to point out is over on the top right, there is a box that's highlighted called Show Me, and all of those things are options for different types of visualizations, and Tableau actually makes an attempt, depending on what kinds of data, how many dimensions, how many measures you have included, of what the possibilities are. And so that is an interesting, it's a fast way that you can just click through those boxes and test it all out. This is very point and click oriented. So on the one hand, it's kind of easy to get tangled up. On the other hand, it's very easy and low risk to just experiment and click through. So I thought that piece of it was pretty fun. Okay. So this is what I came up with. I mentioned on the previous screen the number of records. So what we did with this data, just to see, you know, what Tableau could do, is add that number of records up to the rows area in the top middle, and it basically automatically created a new table. Then you can go to each of those individual tables, and the axes are very easy to edit. So the average rating axis on the top table, I basically sorted it from lowest to highest, and then put the adjacent table below that shows the number of records on each. So this is kind of the, you know, data literacy point, which many of you are probably more experienced really in data analysis than myself. But I just show this because when you're working in Excel just from those spreadsheets, I don't know that I would think to break out number of records separately. So it's handy that Tableau had that there. I tried it out, and voila, you can see that, well, the Rutherford Science Festival in teal, which is the fourth one across, it is in the middle of the pack as far as average rating, but there were only, that's based on only 5 survey responses. Whereas the UNC Science Festival is based on, you know, 65 plus responses. So it kind of helps when you're asking questions of this data. It's very easy to make a nice, you know, this average rating by festival, but how meaningful is it? It depends how credible is it for any individual festival? Well, it really depends on how many records you have. And so we're not really, it looks like we're comparing apples to apples up here on the top, but we're not really doing that. That's not really the case if you dive in a little bit further. And lastly, this is the chart that Karen was really interested in. She gave me, in addition to the rating average, the ratings spreadsheet data, she also gave me the more detailed secret shopper where the field researchers were collecting information on individual exhibits. And she was interested in finding out, can we really join those tables together, and can we really put together a data visualization to link those two different data sets. And Karen, I'm happy to say that it's a little rough and it needs probably some additional tweaking. For today's presentation purposes, it's fine, but I wouldn't want to make any bets based on this particular chart at this particular time. I think I need to do a little bit of ground truthing and kind of go through the process again. But I went ahead and threw it up here to show that it is possible. And I think that this is the really cool potential of Tableau to be able to combine our big aggregate festival evaluations across our 25 festivals and link them with the smaller data sets that are collected in different ways as part of the mini grants. I think that's really, really cool. And so this particular visualization is meant to compare average festival ratings for these several festivals and the associated average wait times that the secret shoppers spent waiting for exhibits during their test. And at this point, so you can click, when you have the tool open, you can click through, you can see all the annotations. It's a pretty slick tool. It's a little bit, though, I would say it's accessible for the non-specialist, but there's definitely a learning curve. And the more you know about the underlying statistics, really the safer that you'll be in using this for data analysis. And at that point, I'll stop and I'm happy to field questions or have a little bit of discussion before we move on and talk about the next piece.
Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. So I meant to say this at the top of the hour and totally forgot, so I apologize. If you have questions about Tableau, you can either type those in the chat or you can raise your hand, and we'll monitor that the same way that we usually do. So Taylor will keep an eye on the chat if you want to type a question for Teresa to answer. If you'd rather raise your hand and actually ask out loud for the group to hear, then feel free to do that as well, and I will unmute your mic so that you can ask your question to the group that way.
So we have a question from Roshni, and she wants to know, are there some charts that are only available on the licensed versions? Some chart types?
I don't actually have that impression. When I was preparing for this, I looked at a number of training videos for Tableau in general. I also looked at some training videos for Tableau Public just to make sure that the access was the same. My understanding, the dashboard of the tools that are available once you have the data in the system, it appears to me that that is identical. The difference seems to be the access to data sets and the data set storage. That seems to be really where they draw the lines between the different licensing.
And I can second that. It's been a while since I've looked at Tableau, but the privacy of your data is really what the different licenses were about several years ago when I played around with Tableau originally. And I think that for the most part, that is still true, if not entirely true.
Yeah, the Tableau public profile, that is where you save any visualizations that you produce with a Tableau public license. However, you can you can make them visible or not visible on your profile. So it's a little weird that they're not actually making you publish it, but it is in cloud.
Right. And it used to be true, and Teresa, tell me if you think this is still the case or not, that once you create a visualization, anybody who looks at that visualization can click on any of the bars that we're seeing right now. You can click on those bars once that has been published and see the data that live underneath it.
Right. It's basically, the key is the interactivity. So there's nothing stopping you from snipping screenshots of whatever you want, saving locally. Like that is fine. But the visualization file in the Tableau proprietary format, that's what you're required to put back, or else, it's just gone. I think.
I think we probably have a couple of other questions for Taylor to ask, but so while she's thinking about which of those to present next, I'll say that one thing that I really like about the visualization that Teresa has up right now is, I think it's a good way to consider how you might choose to look at the kinds of ratings that you're getting across different years of the festival. And so if there were particular items that it would be helpful to look at by year, then you could create one database of all of your attendee data so far, add in a variable for year, and then go from item to item, looking at the spread of the data across different years, if that was of interest, and see these different kinds of stacked graphs, which might be kind of cool if that's of interest to people and you haven't had an easy way to go about doing that. Taylor, other questions?
Okay.
I don't have any questions in the chat box or the questions box.
Okay. And Teresa, I'm sorry, I think I just interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to say that so the other thing that I was kind of playing around with is that once you have the data in there, you can aggregate and disaggregate in different ways. And so to your point about an average, like average festival ratings, I think that you can aggregate like generally the festival rating average across all festivals is X. And you can kind of compare, oh, my average to the norm. So not, not necessarily comparing one festival against another, but all aggregated and then broken out years, individual festivals or whatnot, if you're trying to get a sense of ups and downs, because I think there will be those.
Great. Let me ask one more question. So I just said something about creating a massive database, but given what you showed about how Tableau will combine databases, I'm wondering if you even need to do that, or if you could load in, like if any of the festivals out there could load in their 2015, their 2016, and their 2017 data separately, would Tableau automatically combine those and create a year variable based on the database it came from?
So if there is a column in common that can be used kind of as a key of sorts, a join key. So this is like it's basically using different sheets as tables and assembling a database. And the tricky part is really the naming conventions, because when we combined these two, the field research versus the ratings, the naming conventions weren't 100% aligned. Like there was in one festival name, but not in the other sheet. So it's really about consistency of data. And so when you're ingesting it or when you're collecting it, in some of those cases, if you establish common drop-down menus that are applied across data sets, then it will alleviate a lot of headaches later when you're trying to then bring those things back together.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so it looks like I'll go ahead and run through Voyant then, if everybody's good here. So going back to our original data set, the little snippet, the only data that we really looked at from this were expo names and ratings. We didn't look at the textual data at all. And I didn't really see an easy way to incorporate that. That's not really Tableau's strength. I mean, you might be able to shoehorn it in, but I don't know that it would be worth the effort. However, Voyant is specifically designed to analyze textual data. It's web-based. It is an open source scholarly project created by humanities scholars to do, and I don't know if anybody knows this term, distant reading of large-scale literary corpuses. So, for example, all of the documentation, the tool assistance, the example that they use is the Jane Austen corpus, complete works of Jane Austen. So there is that basic background incorporated into the way some of these tools work, better, better or worse for the kind of data that we're talking about here. So there's two ways to use Voyant as well. Both of them are free. One is just using the web browser, which is what I'm using. There's also a server version that actually allows you to not upload data, so actually protecting privacy more, and also it will make it run faster with bigger data sets. And the crux of Voyant, Wordclouds. And I love Wordclouds, and to be honest, the first time I made a word cloud like 15 years ago, it was for the pretty picture. And I did not use word clouds for anything more than that until I was teaching research, teaching students how to use Wikipedia, in fact, to do wiki code. And I was interested in finding out what their perceptions of Wikipedia were before and after. So I collected a bunch of perception, free commenting at the beginning of the project, and then I collected I asked the same question at the end. And what I found in that, and then I just dumped it into two separate word clouds. And my impression was that beforehand, they were worried about the tech piece of it, the coding, the data, like that was what they were confused or concerned or wanted to learn about. And after the end, the words that were coming up to the top, like the higher frequency words, were actually more related to collaboration, the talk pages. So basically, the collaborative aspects of a wiki tool in general. And so it made me really happy. And it's just an impression. This is a very crude, what they call it, a meta way of looking at things. But the data behind it is actual frequency of term frequency. Okay, so this is a word cloud from the rationale or free comments section of those average festival ratings, and you'll see what words were used most frequently. And I got that by going to Voyant Tools. There's above the little help, let's see. So the three buttons at the top right of the box, there's a question mark, there's a little, there's a button. So if you push that button, in addition to ingesting text, just copying and pasting or typing a URL, I got that one column of data out of that spreadsheet. All I did was open this little box, choose table, so to take an Excel file, and then do you want the data from the entire sheet, or do you want a full column or more? And so I chose column 5, so all I did was type the number 5 in there, click OK, and then I uploaded the file and clicked the reveal button. And whoop. There we go. And this is the screen of all of, of the primary 5 tools that Voyant offers. Out of, I think there were 27 or 28, I have it listed somewhere in there. And several of them, so the word cloud at the top left, the terms And what I'll do now is I'll just go, I have it up live. So if you can see my web browser now, I'm looking at that same screen, but just live. So when I mouse over the word cloud, it gives me the word frequency. So kids is the most frequently used. The summary is just below on the bottom left. But if I click, so all of these are discrete modules, all 5 of these that you see on the screen, but they are interrelated, interactive with one another. So once I show, you know, the word cloud at the top left, the reader in the middle, which is the transcription of the text that is pulled. So you can see that it's just that one single rationale column, and then the bar shows where you are, how much of the document you're viewing. The trends box, I'm going to mention this because this is, again, about how easy it is to create data visualizations that might be misleading or might be meaningless. You know, I mentioned that this is meant to analyze a document. So this does not distinguish between the fact that this is 193 different snippets of information. It assumes that there is a narrative arc. So for our purposes in this particular data, that trends graph is completely meaningless. It doesn't mean a thing because all of those are different individual people. That is not a, oh, and if it was an interview, a qualitative focus group interview transcript for an hour, then that narrative arc might be more applicable. But going back to interactivity of the tool, so if you click on in the left on the word cloud, it actually goes and it highlights the word in the reader, and then it adjusts the trends graph to show that individual word. So like I said, all of these things are discrete. They can all be exported and embedded into web pages, interactive web page widgets or videos independently. But while you're using them as a group, they don't all, it depends on the tool, but they tend to talk to each other. And so the last box I'll show at the bottom right, the keywords in context. So it will choose the first word. The highest frequency word is the first keyword, and then it will show context. Every occurrence, some left, some right. And then for each, so I'll just click through so that you can see. I'll start at the top left with the word cloud again. The terms, like I said, so this is basically just simply a table view of that word cloud. And then clicking on the links tool. It is supposed to, there it is. It's supposed to take some of the more frequently used keywords and then make some network connections regarding other words that are related. So the buttons on the top right of that box are duplicated across all the different 5 windows. So there's the export button. There's the window pane button that allows you to go to the master tool list and choose another tool. And then there are options for this tool. So I didn't mention previously, but this tool automatically has, it applies a global stop word list. So, and of those kinds of terms, it automatically applies that. It automatically removes punctuation. If you wanted to include Twitter handles or information like that there is a process called tokenization where it can identify word boundaries in different, there are some customizations that you can do with word boundaries. So the only other thing I wanted to do here, so I have the reader, I showed you the trends, the document terms is simply a table version of the trends line. The correlations, so on the bottom right on the contexts, so that didn't work. I was going to say it's not applicable to us in this case, again, because we're using 170 or 190 some odd different, so they are not going, they aren't correlated with one another, so that also wouldn't make sense. So it's interesting to see that it actually didn't do it. On the bottom one, the summary, the documents, so like I said, this is meant to be a corpus tool. So again, if we wanted to aggregate and provide that same column from lots of different festivals, different sheets, it can totally do that. It can, and very easily do that. And then phrases, so that's repeating word frequency phrases as opposed to single terms. But I just want to show one other thing. So these are all of the different options: corpus tools, document tools, visualization tools, etc. So I kind of like the topics tool, or I wanted to just show it because what it does is it's an algorithm and it randomly assigns a bunch of words in a group and a bunch of groups of words, and then it does it over the course of like 200 iterations. And so the topics are kind of refined. And I mention it because if you all do research ever where you're looking in JSTOR for academic journal articles, JSTOR is beta testing a search tool that uses this same algorithmic method. It has you dump a PDF of an article that you like, and then it uses the keywords in that article to create some and then runs a topic modeling algorithm, and then it searches for, so it's a different way of searching for documents in a more like this, kind of like using those, the Google algorithms. So I just thought that that was a little bit slick and wanted to show it there. So at this point, I will go back to my slides here. I'm going to click present again and see. So the full list of tools, there's a link on the screen, and I'm happy to share my slides with the group. And Karen has access to them already. Like I said, the practical applications of Voyant, there's not nearly as much customization. It's just a bunch of little off-the-shelf ways to visualize text in different ways. And it's, it's interesting, and it's just a different way to get ideas and identify patterns in your data.
Hey, wait a minute.
I would be remiss if I ended this talk without pointing out a major drawback in both tools. The slickness and the way that they automate so many of these processes, it makes it very easy. It's dangerous for somebody like me. It's like, I know enough to be dangerous here, to create a really nice visualization that could be completely misleading or meaningless. And I use this quote to illustrate, because the quotation is widely attributed to Mark Twain. However, according to Wikipedia, Mark Twain attributes this quote to Benjamin Disraeli, who was the British Prime Minister in the late 1800s in a couple of different times. However, Wikipedia says that researchers were not successful finding that phrase in any of Disraeli's works, and that the earliest known appearances were years after his death. Now, you can discuss the veracity of and reliability of Wikipedia, but it took me at one Google search to find those very pretty images with those lovely quotes with a nice, professional looking photo portrait of the purported authors. And in fact, we don't know where that quote came from. So every time I play around with a new data analysis tool, I am reminded that I am limited not so much by the tool, but by my own understanding of statistics. So I enjoyed putting this together. Hope it gives you all a better sense of these tools, and go forth and experiment. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to look for raised hands in a second. Can I get you to share? I wanted to point out a couple of things that are an extension of the in vivo tour that Jen gave us a few months ago. Can you go back to the live screen that you had of Voyant?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So a couple of things that this brought up for me. So first of all, this links that associates things is pretty darn cool. And so the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this is the immediate ability to look at qualitative responses across different kinds of events. So we had an experience several years ago now with the North Carolina Science Festival where they had brought in different sort of celebrity presenters. And so those were ticketed events, people paid to come, and we had wildly different feedback from one celebrity to the other. And this would have pointed that out to me immediately. So I would have seen comments with celebrity A immediately linked to too expensive, not enough science, words or phrases that would have in 2 seconds shown me what the patterns were in the data. Instead of me having to go through and do the formal analysis. So while there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, I think the power of this to help you start to see patterns immediately and then figure out where you have the statistical ability to go in and explore further is pretty awesome. The other thing that is maybe a more direct comparison to what we saw in the tour of in vivo that Jen gave us, if we go back to the word cloud, where you were able to click on the word fun, and then to see all of those different comments highlighted in the next section, you can scroll through that entire list and find every instance of the word fun, which depending on what you're looking for in your reports, if you're looking for quotes that are both reflective of your data set, but also sort of the best fun quote, if you're using it for PR purposes, this would help you narrow in on that in seconds. Whereas in vivo, it first of all has an expensive license to allow you to do that, but also takes more manipulation than just going through a couple of clicks to load something in. And then I had not thought about using this to analyze social media feed, but I think that's brilliant. So I was thrilled that you mentioned Twitter. Finding a way to download all of your social media feed into this kind of a system and then look to see what the trends are and what people are talking about. Is it positive? Is it negative? I think there's very cool potential for our group, especially as people become more and more addicted to social media, as if that was even possible, to do a quick look through tweets or whatever else whatever other ways people are sharing their opinions about things. Right. Thank you, Teresa, for all of this. This is awesome. Taylor, any questions that have come in?
We don't have any questions, but we have 2 comments. The first is from Michelle in the Bay Area. She just said, this was fantastic. Thank you. And then we have another comment from Jen. I was also thinking that it would be useful for discourse analysis. I really like the document segments.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to change presenter back to me for the last few minutes that we have here. Maybe. Okay. Oh, I did not realize this was animated. Sorry. Hang on. Okay. So Some of you already know this because you've started to have your conversations with Taylor and with me about what you want and need to happen for the your 2018 festival data collection. For those of you who haven't gotten any updates about that yet, I wanted to just make a quick announcement and then let you all know that you'll be getting much more detail about this sometime soon. So instead of requiring the 2017 attendee survey this year, we are offering an alternate. You can do both if you want to, but to meet the data collection requirement for the project for this year, you'll have the option of using your 2017 attendee survey again with the new consent process, once we know specifically what that is. Or instead, you can do an online follow-up survey. The purpose of that, or the goal of that, is to take advantage of any existing email list that you have of potential festival goers. So these may not be people who've ever come to your festival before. They might be a member list for your home institution, or a broader science outreach list that you have. And the goal of this is to contact everybody in the month following your festival to find out who came, who didn't, and what else they did during the month in their leisure time, so that we can start to build a picture of how our festivals factor into people's free time and what they do when they leave the house. There are some marketing implications that are part of this. The whole piece is based on the idea of sort of STEM learning ecosystems and starting to learn more about who our audience is, who our audience isn't, which builds off of the mini grant that Wisconsin is doing and the outgroup survey there. So extending that idea a little bit further. But then also to find out what the rest of their lives look like, and if those lives look similar for people who do and do not come to our festival events. The goal for this is that we will launch it on the first Monday of each month. And so our festivals that are going to happen in about 2-3 weeks time, who are interested in starting this, will launch on March 5th. And we will detail the full process of how those data are to be collected. What will happen between now and March 5th is that we will work with Amy Grack-Nelson and her team up at Science Museum of Minnesota to do Think Alouds with the items on the survey. Most of those items have already been tested either through EvalFest, or they've been used by the Pew Research Center, or on something called the General Social Survey. But we do want to take the time to field test those again, because we learned so much about what does and does not work as far as wording goes when we took the time to do Think Aloud work with those items, with the attendee survey items earlier in the project. So all of that is happening. You'll learn more about that and get to see drafts of the survey soon. I also wanted to make sure that you have these dates in your calendars for upcoming webinars. So Jen and I are going to lead a session on February 8th that is going to be a report out of the year 3 data. And I'm pretty stoked about this one. So instead of doing just an update of the slides, we'll do a little bit of that, but we also want to start to look for patterns in the data based on the different kinds of festivals that we're hosting. So beginning to take a more nuanced look at some of the demographic data we have from attendees, but also some of the variability that just lives in the fact that our festivals look different across the community. So I'm excited to be able to present that with Jen in February. Todd is going to lead the March webinar, and then Catherine is going to lead the April webinar. They are each still narrowing down on what those topics will be, so stay tuned for those details. Then in May, we're going to do something related to data reporting. We are working very hard to get the supplement submitted to NSF this week or early next week. We've been back and forth with our program officer several times. He has sent the supplement, a summary of the supplement to, or talked about it with his fellow program officers, and we've gotten sort of the initial nod to submit a full proposal to ask for supplemental funding. That supplemental funding would go to fund 2 additional in-person meetings, and then to flesh out all of the video training so that we can provide a more comprehensive set of videos that begin to dip into reporting. So what we hope will happen is that we'll be successful with that, and that the May 10th webinar will prepare you for a session on data storytelling. The goal is to bring Amanda back to this year's meeting if we're successful at getting this extra money. And so we will sneak up on that by leading you through some data analysis and some data interpretation, so that when we have our full day of training with Amanda in June, we can jump right into how to use those results and those interpretations to tell stories. If we are not successful, I have a plan B lined up that will focus on a template that we're hoping to share at some point, either in May or later in the year, that is for one-pagers. That's sort of a plug-and-play template for one-pagers that you can create to show your data. So that is where we're going. And that is all that I have for today. I know from a text that I just got from Taylor that Roshni would like to take a quick minute at the end of this call, and I think we have time for that. So Roshni, let me see if I can take you off of mute. Okay, so I think we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm leaving my museum, so I just wanted to, which means I'm also therefore leaving my science festival and the EvalFest community, and I just wanted to say goodbye to everyone and thank you for everything, for putting up with all my questions, and I've learned a lot from all of you, and I really want to thank you all so much for that. I've really enjoyed being part of this community so much. Probably should have left after the conference in Florida, but I will miss working with all of you, so just thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. We wish you the best of luck in whatever you're going to do next. Where can we find you if we want to stay in touch?
I'm not sure what I'll be doing
Okay.
yet, so I will email you my personal email.
Perfect.
And so then you can get me there.
Okay, so anybody who wants to send a message to Roshni directly, please do that. If you need to find her, it sounds like we'll know how to reach her. So feel free to go through us to get that. And so good luck, Roshni, wherever you land, and a happy New Year again to everybody else on the call. And here's looking forward to whatever 2018 has to bring. Thanks for joining in. We'll talk to you next month.